I've got Congressman Ben Cline, who's been on the show before from Virginia 6. Congressman Cline is on Judiciary. He was in Yuma. We're going to get to that in a moment, but he's also on Appropriations and Budget. Congressman, just to help people, we just had the great Russ Vought, the OMB, second OMB director under President Trump, and the president's now included Russ into the conversation because Russ has this balanced budget. He's talking about going after woke and weaponized programs to get meaningful cuts this year in appropriations and then deal with the debt ceiling after we get the appropriations bill through. You're on, and you've got some pretty power. I hope people in Virginia 6 appreciate the fact that Congressman Ben Cline's at the tip of the spear. Judiciary, Appropriations, and Budget, three pretty heavy committees. Walk our audience through, if you could, for a second, the difference between the Budget Committee and the Appropriations Committee.
Sure. It's great to be with you. And the Budget Committee is essentially setting out a blueprint for spending, and it sets out top-line numbers and passes those on to the appropriators. The appropriators can't go over that number. Then they get to kind of allocate the money according to where the Appropriations Committee decides it should go. But the blueprint is very important. So the Budget Committee, led by Jody Arrington, is putting together a blueprint for spending that's going to lead to balance. And the question is, how fast do we get to balance, and how fast can we target these woke, weaponized programs that have been blown up over the last couple of years into these multi-billion-dollar programs that are coming after our kids, coming after all different manner of our economy, making sure that we can't even invest our retirement savings in the accounts that are going to bring back the best returns. Instead, because of ESG standards, mandates, they're going to be left to woke corporate boards to determine how to invest our retirement savings. So the blueprint happens, and then the Appropriations Committee will get to work slashing a lot of these programs. We anticipate getting no support from Democrats for these appropriations bills, so it's going to be incumbent upon Republicans. And the Freedom Caucus has 4 new members on appropriations to make sure that we provide the cuts necessary to put forward conservative, balanced budget and spending proposals.
I don't have my copy of the New York Times, which was the front page story about a week ago, but the Congressional Budget Office, and maybe you want to tell the people what that is. That's not Gateway Pundit or Breitbart. I mean, it's a organization of the Congress, but they had this report that I know shocked me and shocked all of my hedge fund buddies, in that it laid out a 10-year budget and said, a $1.5 trillion, $1.4 I think trillion this year, roughly $2 trillion deficits, almost in perpetuity going forward, $1 trillion in interest payments annually, and they assume, with pretty conservative estimates, $19 trillion of new debt in the next decade, put on top of the $32 trillion we already have, over $50 trillion in debt by within 10 years. Are you, Stephen, in the Budget Committee, is that roughly the correct numbers?
It is a terrifying set of numbers. The presentation we got today as part of the Republican Study Committee, which is the largest caucus within the Republican conference, about 170 members, and I'm the chairman of the Budget Task Force. So we're putting forward a 10-year balanced budget. It's going to be rolling out soon. Hopefully it will give some guidance to the Budget Committee. It'll give some guidance to the Appropriations Committee on where to cut. But to put it in perspective, the debt that's going to be accumulated in the next 10 years is enough for $1 million of debt for every man, woman, and child in the United States. It's so much that if you eliminated all discretionary spending, that's all defense spending and all the other spending, transportation, education, agriculture, you name it, it all gets eliminated, you would still be in budget deficits as far as the eye could see because of the mandatory spending that is out of control and the fact that these programs are being driven into insolvency by Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer's reckless spending.
When you talk about that, let's go to this controversy because, as Russ Vought says, we're now in Thunderdome. He put out on a tweet. And, of course, Biden, I'm not saying took the bait, but all of a sudden Russ Vought's in the conversation. Russ has put out that over the 10 years you would cut $2 trillion in Medicaid, I think in Medicaid alone. Now, that's leaving Social Security and Medicare aside, but going after Medicaid. Is that feasible given that because Medicaid's not actually totally mandatory, correct? They kind of hide the football on that and they say it is. But am I incorrect? Is there a possibility of actually getting $2 trillion a cut of Medicaid?
So we have pledged not to touch Social Security or Medicare benefits for current beneficiaries, but Medicaid is the health insurance program for the elderly, for the poor, for the disabled, and it's Obamacare health insurance for those earning certain income levels. And adjusting those income levels is going to be part of our reform because there is no other way to get to balance than to look at Medicaid. Now, 5 or 6 years ago, the Republican budget block granted Medicaid to the states. Right now, it's a 50-50, well, it's more like a 60-40 split, where the federal government provides 60% of the funds and the state government provides about 40%. We're talking about moving that either to a 50-50 split or, we are considering bringing back the idea of block granting Medicaid to the states because Virginia knows and can do a better job of providing these health insurance coverage for these groups of people without having double the regulations that the federal government puts on for Medicaid recipients. So it's a better way to do things to let Virginia innovate and make sure that everybody's covered. It's just a question of do we have the political will to go ahead and pass it in the House and stand by it when it's confronted by the demagoguery of the Senate and the president.
I think what Russ said, and I read one of his tweets, it was $100 billion. And I think if you go back to who you said, the elderly, the disabled, the children, that even if he kept those requirements, there was enough in here that had now gone beyond what the original intent was, that it was $100 billion a year. Could you, is that possible? Is it possible to actually make these cuts and not go to the core programs that Medicaid was originally set up to do?
Yes, and much of it has to do with reforming the healthcare system that surrounds the program. So Obamacare was set up to allow for Medicaid expansion where states could expand Medicaid roles to include individuals who were single adults or people who were below that income level but who were working. Adjusting those income levels is something that we're exploring to make sure that we target those who truly need the temporary health coverage, but not socializing health insurance markets for low income level earners. That's what has happened. A lot of the health insurance marketplace has gone away for these low income earners who would have, but for Medicaid, would have participated in the private insurance market. So we have to restore that marketplace competition, get those health insurers back in the game and providing coverage for people at a lower rate that provides better coverage than the government otherwise would.
Congressman Cline, none of this is easy, correct? These are tough. These are all tough calls. All the easy decisions are decades behind us. So these are, in being in budget and appropriations, and the Republican Study Committee, when you guys are talking about this, you men and women are talking about this, these are not easy, these are tough topics to talk about. The cuts are tough, et cetera. Am I correct on that?
Absolutely, absolutely. We want to protect Social Security for current recipients. We want to protect Medicare coverage for current recipients who are seniors. But, we have to make sure that we balance the budget because this inflation that we're seeing right now is a result of the excessive spending that we've seen over the past couple of years. It's affecting food prices, it's affecting fuel prices, it's affecting the interest on the debt. The fact that increasingly interest on the debt is going to become the biggest expenditure of the federal budget, and it's going to crowd out all of these other programs, school lunch programs, you name it. These programs are going to be crowded out by interest on the debt, and so we've got to tackle it. And tough decisions have to be made, but that's why voters elected Republicans, because we're prepared to confront these challenges and and meet the challenges of the day, whereas Democrats just want to run away from them and continue the road to insolvency that we've been on for so long.
When the American people see, and I'm a America First hawk as a former naval officer, my daughter's a West Point grad, so we're hawks, but we're CCP hawks. We want to be very constrained around the rest of the world. When you see Janet Yellen sitting there talking about $10 billion more to the Ukraine, where we're paying their pension funds and their health care, and you're sitting in rooms with people making incredibly tough decisions, incredibly tough calls. What is the trade-off there? How can the American people look at, we've committed, Fox News reports, we've either spent or committed between arms and humanitarian, and most importantly, just paying for their, I think, $5 billion a month for their government, $200 billion to Ukraine. Does it ever come up that we got to put everything is on the block and everything's got to be looked at? And how do you make the argument on the Medicaid, which I believe has to get done, when you're sitting there, people are sitting there and pushing, writing massive checks to Ukraine, sir?
Yeah, when you're talking about making sure that American children are taken care of, when you're talking about making sure that American borders are being secured, and we can't afford these things because we're busy taking care of Ukrainian children and Ukrainian borders, that is frustrating to a lot of Americans. And we have to make sure that not only that we make sure that we track every dollar that has been spent thus far, because it's $100 billion that has been spent thus far in Ukraine. We have to make sure that every dollar is accounted for, and much of it went to NGOs and other entities unrelated to even the Ukrainian government, which has its own corruption issues, but these NGOs are all over the map. And so tracking those dollars is hard enough. But we have to make sure that we don't just provide an open-ended expenditure, and that there's a goal in sight, and we have to meet that goal.
Congressman, can you hang for just right to the break? I want to talk to you about your trip to Yuma as part of the Judiciary Committee, a field hearing last week